So hi there, everyone. I'm back. It's been quite some time since I've done a video here at Mad About Madeira, but I'm back. It's been a busy year, which explains why I had my absence. But it was a year, believe it or not, of some traveling and a big move. Unfortunately, that move was not to Madeira, at least not yet. But I moved to another state. That's one thing. And along the way, I did some traveling. I made it to St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands, where I'm from. I was there this past May, and then in June, I got a chance to go to St. Kitts, where I was actually raised, and one of the islands where my ancestor from Madeira settled. St. Kitts, that would be on my father's side, my Madeiran ancestor. And then I went over to Nevis, where my mother is from actually. My father's from St. Kitts. My mother is from Nevis, right next door. Got a chance to go over there. First time visiting those islands in 22 years. I didn't know I was going to be away for that long. But Nevis, where my mother is from, that's also where one of my Madeiran ancestors also settled. So those two islands, Madeiran ancestors, settled on both of those islands. So it was a pleasure going back there because all this information I learned about Madeira and my connection to that island, I learned within those 22 years. I did not know this the last time I was there. I wish I did because I would have had so much more information. I would have known more, and the elders were still alive, and I would have gotten the necessary and pertinent information I would have needed, so I would have more information when I traveled to Madeira to know what's what. But anyway, as I said before, I moved to another place, another state. So that's where I'm doing this video from right now. But one of the reasons I jumped on here to do this video, it's not because of Madeira per se. I mean, I'm still yearning for that place. I would love to go there for Christmas of this coming year. So if there's anyone out there want to donate to this cause, that's three of us: me, my wife, and my son. And my son did not go with us the last time we were there. He was just 3, I think he was, at the time in 2022. But we want to go back so bad. I want to go there for Christmas. But, we just bought a house and all that stuff. So money is not something exactly that's flowing right now. But we would love to go back this coming Christmas. Looking at tickets already, they're going for $1,400 a person. It's a pretty penny out there, and of course, it's a long trip. There are no direct flights from where I am right now. So I'm going to have to fly from here, perhaps to New York City, perhaps to New Jersey, perhaps to Toronto. Then you fly over to Portugal, and then mainland Portugal, that is. And then you have to fly to Madeira. So, when you take a trip like that, you're basically spending an entire day, sometimes a day and a half, just traveling. So I always like to factor in the fact that if I'm traveling to a place like that, I want to go for like 7 days, where 2 of those days will just be traveling. So at least I have 5 full days in the place, But anyway, we'll talk about that some more about that later on down the road, okay? But again, put a sticky on that. I would love to get to Madeira with my family at the end of the year for Christmas. Anyway, this video is less about Madeira and it's going to be more about Lisbon. I saw a video the other day. Now remember, I can't speak authoritatively about the country or even Lisbon because I've never lived over there. I've only visited. And the last time I was there, I was only passing through Lisbon. I spent a day on the way to Madeira, there in Lisbon, and I spent a day when I came back. Didn't get a chance to go all around, didn't get a chance to go to the outskirts, just went to a few places. When we got there, spent some time in the hotel because I think we got there on a Sunday, so the place was relatively quiet, tired from the long trip and everything. And then the following day we went to Madeira, so I didn't get a chance to see much. On the way back, saw a little bit more, but still did not get a chance to see much. This video that I saw the other day, it was a couple I forgot the name of the video, and I'm sure if you did a search, you'll find out. You'll find a video. Um, but they were traveling through Lisbon, and they were showing you um, just how should I put it? Showing you areas of the city, at least. I would say areas because, again, I didn't travel the entire city. But they were traveling through areas where there was graffiti all over. Now, when we were there was graffiti. It was one of the things that surprised me. I just kind of thought graffiti was like a New York City type of thing. I wasn't thinking I was going to go to Europe and see that, you know. But it was all over the place. It was a little bit of a turnoff, but it did add some character to the place, right? But apparently, when this couple went there, they're saying you're seeing graffiti all over the place. There was a monument somewhere, a monument that we had visited somewhere there in downtown Lisbon. And it's a monument. It was marble, white, and someone decided to tag it with graffiti, you know? And then the couple kept walking and they showed you a lot of homeless people. They were talking about defecation or excrement on the floor. There was an area, it's like a lookout that I remember going to, and you can stand and look out and look over the city. And all over the floor, there was just graffiti and things all over the place. So they were traveling and they showed you a couple of incidences where there were people walking up to them and wanted to sell them drugs and harassing them to sell them drugs. Now, I don't know what kind of drugs they were referring to, but they wanted to sell them drugs. And a couple of times they had to stop the camera because they were being harassed by people doing such and such. Now, I don't know who these people were. They never showed who they were or whatever, you know. But they showed some homeless people. They showed corners where there were people just laying down. There was garbage and everything like that. And it gave me a moment to pause, you know, because again, when we went there, did see graffiti. I wouldn't say we came across a lot of dirtiness or anything like that. In fact, we saw workers constantly keeping the place clean by picking up stuff and so on. But also we did see a lot of dilapidated old buildings all around. Again, I just chalked it up as somewhat character to the city and everything like that, you know? So that was one thing, to see that. I did feel a certain way about it. I was just like, well, you know, wish the city, you know, was looking a little bit better, but it almost seemed like it was kind of like crumbling, you know? Almost seemed like it was getting worse in terms of the garbage that's around and whatever. But again, these people only showed but so much. You know, for all I know, they may be in a part of town, because there's always a part of town that's in most places, most big cities, that could be a little shady, not too clean, you know. They only went to a certain area. So again, I wasn't there. I didn't travel the whole city, so I can't say, hey, well, that's only a little segment over here. It's not the entire city. I cannot speak authoritatively about that. But this is what they were showing. So that was one thing. But that was not the thing that really caught my attention. What caught my attention was something that I predicted a while back, and I'm fearful of. One of the reasons why I love Portugal, one of the reasons why I love a city like Lisbon, one of the reasons why I love Madeira, or just Portugal in a whole, is because it's one of the European countries that I have felt good about, that they have been able to stay away from the far right, if I can say that. And when I say the far right, I am talking about the far right that is all about anti-immigration, get rid of the immigrants, or there have been harassment of immigrants, you know, or you've heard about different things involving immigrants. And I always felt good about Portugal because they seem to kind of avoid that issue. Because Portugal is one of those countries that I have said, ever since their revolution back in the early 1970s and giving up their African colonies, to me, from what I have noticed, they have been a country that has pretty much minded its business and stayed in its corner. They're not going over interfering in other countries' affairs. They're not helping to drop bombs on countries. They're not going over there and trying to get oil from certain countries. And they're not really creating any enemies out there. So they have been relatively safe, kind of off the radar. You don't hear much going on with them, right? And I just was always saying to myself, well, thank goodness, it's a place where you don't really hear much about that. I was very happy to go to the country and then go to the city and saw a mixture of people. And it seems like everyone was just going along their merry way, I didn't really hear stories about immigrants being harassed. It probably happens, I don't know. But I didn't really hear much about that. Of course, they have a relatively noticeable population of Africans or people of African descent, because after all, they once owned colonies in Africa. So you probably have a lot of people there from Mozambique, from Angola, those places. So you do have people in Portugal of descent from those places, or they're born in those places and now they live in Portugal. So when I was looking at the video, something just told me to go ahead and look at the comments section. And sure enough, and this is my fear, and this was my fear, you start to see the little comments in there about immigrants, little subtle jabs at immigrants, little subtle commentary, or comments, I should say, that imply that Portugal is going downhill because of immigrants. You saw things where people were making, little jokes about immigrants and, oh, look at Portugal. Oh, they want to have open borders. Look at what they're doing. They're allowing all these people in. That, to me, is concerning language, because that stuff eventually escalates after a while. And my fear had always been with Portugal that at some point in time, because of the rapid growth and the influx of so many people coming in, and because of the influx of people, this normal thing begins to happen, because so many people are coming in, people with money from one side who can afford certain things that a lot of people from Portugal may not be able to afford as a luxury. And so when they're coming in with their dollars, it's causing prices to increase in housing. It's probably causing a limit on available housing. So the local Portuguese people are feeling that pinch. And when this begins to happen, there's going to start to be some resentment, some animosity, some finger pointing as to who we can blame for this problem. It's human nature. It's going to be like, hey, I used to be able to afford this. I can't afford it anymore. It's their fault. I used to be able to afford my rent. Now it's gone up. Now I can't afford it anymore. I can't afford to move anywhere else because it's just as expensive. It's their fault. And so when you start seeing this, you start hearing that language. You start hearing those sentiments. You start hearing those comments. Because one thing that's going to happen, people can live in peace with one another when there's enough to go around. But when everyone starts to begin to compete for the same resources, humans can get very nasty with one another. And then, this is the big fear that I have. Right now, Portugal, I don't even know what their political climate is like. I have no idea. I don't think you have the far right running the place. But in instances like this is where you have people like and I know this channel is not about politics, but you're going to have people like a Donald Trump and Adolf Hitler. Different people who come in and start blaming the immigrants, demonizing the immigrants, stigmatizing the immigrants, pointing fingers at the immigrants, deport them, get rid of them, kill them, start calling them names, start dehumanizing them, like in a place like Rwanda, where people were called cockroaches. Or in some of the places where preceding genocide, people were called rats. And so when you have people having these feelings and making those comments, it's very easy for someone to step in and milk those fears and suck up those sentiments and say, I'm here to help you. I'll get rid of your problems. I'll deport all these people. I will shut down the borders. It's going to be us first before everybody else. And that's going to resonate with a lot of people. Hey, this person is promising to bring my prices back down. This person is promising to do things to level the playing field or to get me back to where I used to be, the glory days of the past, when prices were this, when I could afford that, when there was more than enough to go around for me, and I didn't have to share it with anybody else, unless they look like me. And that's where it becomes rather scary. And I have a feeling if this keeps going, wherever the far right is, or whoever is out there with that xenophobic language or those xenophobic feelings, will begin to rise to the top. And a lot of times, those people in a polite society is like, shut up, nobody want to hear what you're saying. You just sound so hateful and everything. Don't you know we're a progressive society? We're trying to progress and be more civilized than our forefathers or our ancestors that were going around enslaving people. We're different now. But then, when moments like this come about, feelings change. Whatever animosity, whatever resentment may have been suppressed by maybe certain segments of a society, they start rising. You start hearing them more. And it's very easy for somebody to step in and start blaming the immigrants. Start blaming the foreigner. Start blaming the others who are not like us. And I'm not saying that you don't have instances where you have immigrants who come into a particular country. And you're always going to have your bad apples in a bunch. You're always going to have your riffraffs in a bunch. So you can have 100 people coming in just trying to make a better life for themselves. Just trying to make a better life for their families. Keep their head down, they do their work, and they do whatever they have to do. But then you have your riffraffs in between. That's one. Then you also have a situation where sometimes people come from somewhere else. And right off the bat, they're alienated, they're rejected, they're discriminated against. And when people start to feel that way, there tends to be a sense of resentment. They become angry. They're desperate. They're not getting the opportunities. They're being mocked. They're being laughed at. They're being ridiculed. They're being rejected. They're being discriminated against. And what you tend to happen, especially when young people, they sit there, they can't really get anything. So they sit around idle. They start hanging out with each other. And to defend themselves against perhaps persecution coming their way. And then what happens, you start having gangs. And then when you have the gangs, and they start getting themselves into mischief or causing problems, then that then serves as justification for those people who already are looking at them, side-eyeing them to say, see, that's why we don't want them around. Look at how bad they are. Look at what they're doing. And this becomes a circular thing, a vicious cycle. We're going to discriminate against them. We're not going to allow them to do this. We're going to that, mock them, laugh at them, shove them in some ghettos on the other side of town, keep them away from polite society. And then when they lash back out in anger and whatever, then it's like, see, I told you, we don't like them. See, I told you they're bad people. Got to get rid of them. That type of stuff bugs me. As a child of immigrants myself, it bothers me. My father and mother came from other Caribbean islands to the U.S. Virgin Islands, a U.S. territory, looking for a better life. They didn't cause any problems for anyone. They put their head down and put themselves to work. But of course, in groups among them, you had your bad apples, cause problems. You had kids that came over. I remember growing up and kids going to school of immigrants, just like my parents were immigrants, but they had people coming from other islands with their children. I was born in a U.S. territory, but bringing over their children. I remember in school mocking them, calling them names, ridiculing them. And sometimes some of these kids had tough skin. You roll with the punches. And some of the kids internalized that stuff and it just came out as anger. You see, sometimes when I hear these things and I think, and it doesn't justify immigrants coming in and just waltzing into a country illegally or coming in and causing problems, not justifying any of that. But sometimes I think some of these nations sometimes forget where they themselves came from. For example, here in the United States, most of the immigrants that come here come from the country of Mexico. Ask a lot of Americans, they don't even know the history about how even the southwest part of the United States was once all Mexico. Texas, for example. Just listen to how similar this sounds. Texas. That was once part of Mexican territory. The Mexicans opened their borders to Americans, from the colonies back then, and from the expansion of the United States, going west of the Mississippi. They began to invite or allow Americans to come over into Mexican territory, the territory that we call Texas today. The Americans were coming in, new lands, new frontiers. They came over into Mexican territory. You could say it was legal immigration because the Mexicans were allowing them in. There was one problem, though. A lot of these Americans were coming in and bringing enslaved Africans or descendants of enslaved Africans who they had enslaved over into Mexican territory. Mexico was not having any of that because Mexico had abolished slavery a few years earlier. And they were basically looking at these Americans like, no, you're not going to be practicing that over here. We don't do that. Issue number one that the Americans took up with the Mexicans. What do you mean we can't have slaves? No, you can't. Okay, that got the Americans upset, grumbling under their breath like we can't do what we do over in America, like where we just put these people to work for us and enslave them and all that good stuff that we do. Can't do it over here in Mexican territory. Kicking rocks. Next thing was, the Mexicans wanted to centralize their government. And by centralizing it, that meant that the area that we call Texas today, they wanted to make sure they had a sphere of influence over that area also. And it goes hand in hand with the other thing. So this means now that a central government down in Mexico City, hundreds of miles away, could have influence on this area, on the outskirts of Mexican territory and what we call Texas today. But there were a lot of Americans there. And they were like, we don't want them telling us what to do. Now remember, they're in Mexican territory. And they're upset now that the Mexican government is now trying to stretch their influence into that area to also govern that area, whether it be collecting taxes or collecting revenue or whatever. The Americans didn't want that. And finally, the other thing with the Americans was, after a while, the Mexican government was like, whoa, there's too many of you coming in here now, man. Stop, that's it, cut off. Got them upset. So Americans were still coming over into the Mexican territory illegally. When the Americans had enough of them had gotten in there, they decided to rebel against the Mexican government in their own land. Eventually, those Americans won that war between 1835 and 1836. And they declared themselves independent and called themselves the Republic of Texas. Broke away from Mexico and became the independent Republic of Texas. Eventually, they became the state of Texas and became a part of the United States. But listen to that story. How familiar does it sound? What's going on today in the United States. Similar type of thing. So Americans may have short memories or don't know their history all too well. But that's just one part of the history there. You have a place like Portugal. And as much as I love the country, because I have some of my friends like, do you know what Portugal did? Do you know what Portugal was all about? Of course I know the dark side of Portugal's history. Of course I know. Still love the country though. It's beautiful. The country never did me anything. I'll go and enjoy the country all day long. I'll go and enjoy Madeira all day long because the land itself did not do me anything. It's beautiful. But of course I know that dark side. Similar type of thing. There was a time when Portugal was down, off the coast of Africa, enslaving people. Having colonies in places like Brazil, enslaving people. Had colonies in Africa, colonizing the place and keeping the people as second-class citizens, if they could be called that in those days. So Portugal had some dirty hands. And I'm not saying that they need to give up their sovereignty and just let people waltz into their countries. But sometimes I think when you kind of understand that and understand your history and how in certain parts, Portugal, England, France, how they basically underdeveloped a place like Africa. Gutted the continent in some parts, taking millions of people and enslaving them in other parts of the world. And then when that was done, then turn around and colonize these places, dominating the affairs of these people in their own country. When the Europeans went to Africa to carve up Africa, didn't ask the Africans anything. Just came in. Hey, we'll take this. I'll take a chunk of this. I'll take a chunk of that country. Well, this area. I'll take a chunk of this area and a chunk of that area. And those days of colonization and slavery still have far-reaching effects up to this very day. And so now some of these Africans coming from Africa, for example, try to flee certain things there. Sometimes it's better for them there, believe it or not. They just think that money's growing on trees in Portugal or the United States or England or Switzerland. Or they'll have better opportunities there, or they'll make more money. And so they come to these countries. And these countries, sometimes you have people within those countries. I'm not saying the entire, sometimes the governments, believe it or not, try to be understanding and try to be accommodating. But then the local people who deal with these immigrants on an everyday basis start to find problems with them. They don't follow our traditions. They're not clean. They don't know to do this. They don't know to do that. They ignore our traditions, and we have a problem with that. So all these things can lead to so many problems. But when it comes to Portugal, that's my fear. Those comments concern me because what it's telling me is that there's a groundswell of resentment, animosity, just bubbling. And there's going to be somebody who's going to come and tap into that and start using some really strong rhetoric, threatening rhetoric. And before you know it, you never know where these things can lead, because we have enough history or enough examples in history where little talk like that starts out like that ends up in genocide, ends up in persecution, ends up in abuses. I just hope Portugal doesn't go down that road. But who knows? This whole far-right thing, it's in other European countries. And I'm sure there are people in Portugal who listen to those people, admire them, want to sound like them, want to do what they're doing. And I'm afraid it's only going to be a matter of time before Portugal gets to that point, and I hope it does not. Hope it finds a way to make sure it takes care of its people. Yes, to make sure it looks out for its people. But at the same token, to have grace, to have understanding, and to create an atmosphere of inclusion to make others, foreigners, other people from other places, feel like they are human beings also. So that they won't create these monsters that could create problems in the country. And when they create the problems, it gives justification for the persecutions that come. That's what I wanted to talk about today. You can have it in the comment section. Some of you may not agree with anything I just said. Some of you may. And I know this is not all about Madeira this time and everything. As a matter of fact, right after I watched that video about Lisbon and saw them showing all that stuff, I went and I looked at a video of Madeira. Still just this most beautiful island. And I'm from an island myself, but just so beautiful, so clean, so nice, so green. It was really a big contrast from Lisbon, to be honest with you. Madeira is going to be in my heart. But for Lisbon and for mainland, well, for Lisbon especially, I just hope things just go well, and that when everything is said and done, lands on its feet, and the country and the city just become prosperous. You guys take care, okay? Until the next video, from Matt About Madeira, I appreciate you looking in. Please like, subscribe, share, and you can put stuff in the comments if you want to. Thank you very much.